is it possible people might be better served when they're making investment decisions if they phrased it a little differently, in that it's the price of the dollar that is changing? And that's the nice thing about gold and silver, where it's actually, and maybe I'd say the dollar is pretty darn overvalued at this point. But is that maybe a better way to put things in context for people?
Absolutely. I think that, people need to understand that it's not, the value of silver going up, it's the value of the dollar going down.
Hello there, my friends. Chris Marcus here with you for Arcadia Economics. And today, it's interesting. Things have changed a little bit since last night. And fortunately, Scott Craig of the Silver Independent is here to talk some silver. Scott, it's great to have you on here. I like and appreciate the site that you put together for folks, which I will pull up here. Is the Silver Independent. Really nice blog where you can keep posted on the news and the things that are going on. And Scott, how's everything going with you today?
Things are going great. Great buying opportunity in silver today after that smash down yesterday. So great day.
Yeah, and speaking of the silver price, it is looking a little bit different than yesterday. Interesting to see how quickly the emotions change too. For some reason, Kidco.com is not working on my computer, although I realized I put the ticker on my own website. So we do have the chart here. I wonder what happens if I click on it. Well, let's go back. And you can see, Scott, was it only 2 days ago, silver hits $29. Now that's 4 weeks after it was $18 or $19, and people were happy. And then, to be honest, I don't have the first clue what it's going to do today or tomorrow. I've yet to come across anybody else who does. So my best guess is just to expect that you'll see things like this, where yesterday we saw it down more than $5 at one point. Although I'm eating breakfast and I come back, I'm like, oh, silver's now 26 again. So what do you think about what we saw in the last couple of days? And we can start there.
Yeah, well, one of the things that I think we often hear in the silver community is that silver is by nature a volatile market. And perhaps that's because it's a much smaller market compared to a market like gold, for example. So it can move big. Meaning it can move big up, which we saw last week, and that was a great week. But it can also move down rather dramatically. And so if you're an investor in silver, if you save your money in silver, you have to be prepared for those kinds of volatile moves. However, I would say that despite the fact that it moves very volatilely, over the long term, I think as long as the central banks continue to print money to infinity, there's a general trend that you can hold on to for an optimistic future in silver.
Well, and why don't we start there? Because I find that it's like, at least for me, when I came to this conclusion, it made the rest of it a lot easier. But I can't see any way that the Fed ever undoes its balance sheet. I mean, I have been saying that for about 10 years now, and so far it's still been true. It doesn't look like they're headed in the opposite direction anytime soon. And certainly for those who have studied Austrian economics, you understand why, where it requires more and more money to keep it propped up, let alone that massive debt load that, they're actually, most countries pay interest on their debt. So I don't know, agree or disagree that it's impossible for the Fed to ever undo what they've done, let alone, they can't even stop doing more. They couldn't even get to neutral, let alone undo it. Is that right?
I completely agree. And my background, besides running the Silver Independent, is a historian. I'm a historian. That's my profession. And what you see when you look at other historical parallels of governments that have printed paper money is that they can never taper, they can never stop. And there's a great example of that that happened in France in 1789 with the French assignat. And this book, Fiat Money Inflation in France, is an excellent primer, I think, to potentially what's ahead. It was written by a fellow named Andrew Dixon White over 100 years ago, I think. And it doesn't paint the rosy picture of what happens when governments continue to print and print money. So, for example, in France, you had something called the French Revolution, the Bloody Terror, and then you had the rise of Napoleon. And after he came to power and tried to conquer Europe, you have the deaths of millions of people. So we are living in times that are unprecedented, right? Because these governments around the world all print fiat money. So we have to be very careful with how we proceed in the future here.
Yeah, I think really if you look at history aside from the last 49 years, at least the government version of how it allegedly went down, that's why I loved Austrian economics. I mean, it's like having the Grace Sports Almanac from Back to the Future too, where you know the outcome. I mean, you can look at any chart, any stock market, and then you look at what the prevailing interest rate policy was. And as you point out, none of these are new tricks. These are all recycled tricks with, they repackage the name. But I mean, this is, again, people don't have to take my word for it or your word for it. You can, in fact, you can't find, isn't it correct that you can't find a single instance in history where this has ever worked?
That is correct. And I think what becomes obvious when you look at all of these other examples of how these monetary systems, these fiat monetary systems ended in disaster, these governments all eventually had to go back to sound money. They all had to go back to some kind of gold or silver standard. And if they don't, then you have things like Zimbabwe or Venezuela, where the pain seems to be infinite to the poor people that live there.
Yeah, and well, I guess that's the one thing that I think is nice is that when you understand what's coming and maybe life teaches us to let go of what we think should happen or the way that I think it should go yet. I mean, to the degree where I don't, it's almost like what are the other alternatives where even, let's say silver gets to $50, right? And, I think it's a reasonable question if someone's out there trading, investing, like, I mean, it's all time high. Yet, typically you would say putting money in the bank is the safe way to go. Now we're talking about banks that are generally fraudulent, not my words. I mean, you see the criminal cases, they offer negative interest rates. So, I mean, they're probably insolvent without Fed dollars. So there's a great, like give me the brochure on that one. Cash is just as risky because even with a $7 trillion balance sheet, the Fed's getting ready to print up the next stimulus package. You already explained why it can't be undone. I mean, Tesla shares seem a little expensive to me. And especially if you have a long-term approach, like what would you say to people if we do get to that point where silver is $50? How would you look at it then?
Well, I'd say that eventually people aren't going to care about the dollar price of silver. What's going to matter is whether they have it or not, right? And that's something that, again, we see in all of these episodes in history because, the price of silver in bolivars, what is it, like 70 million bolivars per ounce or something right now? So dollar prices won't matter in the future if we get the kind of inflation that the government right now is telling us that we're going to get. They're announcing it as we speak. They're telling us it's coming. So we can either do what other people have done throughout history, which is through Gresham's law, try to find the money that's going to be the store of value, or we can lose the value of our money, which is the hard work of our lives. So that doesn't sound very appealing to me. So I'd much rather invest in silver, in sound money, certainly.
Yeah, and especially I like what you touched on there. It reminds me of something I've been thinking about where what if I told you that the price of silver, even despite that chart we looked at earlier, maybe the price of silver didn't change at all today or yesterday or last year? I mean, an ounce of silver is an ounce of silver. It's going to be an ounce of silver tomorrow. Maybe, and maybe it's a semantic difference, but is it possible people might be better served when they're making investment decisions if they phrased it a little differently, in that it's the price of the dollar that is changing? And that's the nice thing about gold and silver, where it's actually, and maybe I'd say the dollar is pretty darn overvalued at this point. But is that maybe a better way to put things in context for people?
Absolutely. I think that, people need to understand that it's not, the value of silver going up, it's the value of the dollar going down. And all the fiat currencies are taking turns going down. And pretty soon, they'll all be worthless. As Voltaire once said, all fiat money returns to its intrinsic value of zero, right?
Yeah, and I mean it's like Bernanke and the gang, and I like calling all of the Fed chairman Bernanke. Just, I mean,
uh,
just makes me happy because Bernanke, I guess, was really there when I was introduced to this back in 2009, and I mean, does it really matter who's there? They all do the same thing. Although something I guess we haven't talked about on the show, I'd be curious your opinion. We hear these from time to time. Judy Shelton is being talked about for the Fed. I love some of the commentary from the congressmen. They're like, well, I don't know if now is the time to be toying around with this gold thing,
mm-hmm.
like they're thinking about testing the nuclear reactor in their living room and they don't know how it's going to go. Do you think, I can't imagine whatever they're telling us is really relevant to whether she's really being considered, whether she would actually be in a position of influence, or, maybe they're, on the other hand, if you told me some sort of currency reset was being planned over this past year, we have Davos theme 2021, the Great Reset. Any thoughts on any of that and what with Judy Shelton, and is there a plan behind the scenes?
I think that there's probably a plan for everything behind the scenes, right? Contingency plans for this kind of thing wouldn't be unexpected. And I think it's the reason why the politicians don't like Judy Shelton is because she's a symbol. And that is a symbol of a loss of the politician's power, right? Because right now with the fiat currency system, they can print as much money as they want, and that gives them tremendous amounts of power to do a lot of different things. Some of them good, some of them maybe we would agree not so good, and not necessarily in the interests of the common person. But sound money is an affront to that, right? It's kind of a symbol that their power might come to an end rather soon. So it seems obvious why they wouldn't want her at the Federal Reserve. And in terms of the World Economic Forum, and the Davos group, whether or not they have a plan for the world, I'm sure they probably do. People that have money didn't get to have money without planning, right? That would seem to be a necessary prerequisite in order to make billions and billions of dollars, which is the minimum amount that you need to attend the Davos group in the first place. So it makes sense that they would have plans waiting for us. Although what I would say is that the best laid plans often go awry if chaos begins to start, right? And what we see is that at the end of these fiat currency systems, historically speaking, there's almost always chaos, right? So for example, we talked just briefly before about the Bloody Terror and the rise of Napoleon in France. Well, if we talk about Weimar, we know what happened right after the hyperinflation in Weimar. You have the rise of radical political parties like the National Socialists, the Nazis, and the Communists. So we're living in times where, again, we have to tread very, very carefully. And we'll see whether these plans go forward or whether they get disrupted, which is certainly a possibility.
Yeah, I like that you mentioned that because I've been thinking about it, and certainly I would agree. For the last decade, the prices of the metals have been pretty controlled. I wouldn't say we have free market pricing since silver is still around $26 right now, but certainly when you look at what's happened, in fact, Scott, maybe you can tell me, I know it's great you survey a lot of the different speakers and news out there. Has anybody, outside of the fact that this is exactly what you would expect in a market that is this highly levered and suppressed, I mean, outside of that, have you heard any plausible explanation otherwise of why it took silver 4 years to get back to $20, and then in the month after that, it went up to 29, then down to 24. And in fact, in the last day, went from 29 to 24 to 26. That's a lot of volatility. Is there another explanation outside of the leverage accounting for that?
Well, what I would say is that there's always other explanations, right? So we often find that the mainstream media describes the reasons behind dramatic price moves based on things like, the Hunt brothers cornering the silver market, right, in 1980. That's not why went down in price in 1980. It's not. Today it's the same thing. You have always reasons from media outlets for these moves. Yesterday, one of the big pieces of news in the media was about the potential for a Russian vaccine, right? So optimism, times are good, the economy's great, we're back on track, we'll have a vaccine soon, things will be good.
So silver was down yesterday because of a potential Russian vaccine, was the explanation offered?
Well, not necessarily the vaccine itself, but I think the optimism surrounding it. So the point being that if there was a vaccine and the economy could return to normal, then you would have, the continuation of the current fiat system instead of the rise in the silver and gold prices.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's funny you mentioned that because that was one of the things, again, back, 2009, 2010, I was trading equity options on the New York Stock Exchange, but getting into gold and silver. And I mean, I was even in the middle of finance, and it's like, where do I go to get information? And really to put that in perspective, here, I'm going to share my screen. This is the commodities section of the Wall Street Journal. Even though it says August 11th and today is August 12th, so there's no silver went up because of the crop report or, there's I mean, they're not even putting an article a day. Here we actually had them talking about gold prices. But I think that points out where it's like, yesterday I was thinking of where to look. Fortunately, again, that's why your site is great, and I have it bookmarked, not even in the bookmark folder, but in like the bookmark bar, so you can just be as lazy as possible. I just click on that, and again, I love what you have laid out here. Let's see what the surprise jump in prices may be a good sign for the economy, and it's not stoking the fires of inflation from CNBC. Now here you have silver red alert. COMEX dumps 2 billion ounces of fake silver. Bix Weir. Now that is a headline that actually explains something. So Scott, first, I'd like to congratulate you on just overwhelming the Wall Street Journal. Maybe we could compare it to like the winning streak of the Harlem Globetrotters against the Generals. But I mean, and that's why I do the show, because it's like there's not a lot of places really to find out what's going on, especially to find out what is actually accounting for it. Some of these guys don't even cover it.
Oh, you're absolutely right. And I just wanted to go back to one thing that you just reminded me of, and that was when silver did have that massive run up over the past week or two. One of the reasons that they attributed to the rise in silver was Joe Biden's green stimulus plan. So it's not because we're printing trillions upon trillions of dollars. No, that's not it. It's because Joe Biden has this plan for the future, right? So that's the kind of thing that I like to post it on the site and then just ask some questions about whether these kinds of things make sense or not. Because I think to most rational people, if you understand even just a little bit about the silver market, these explanations don't make a lot of sense. They don't explain the dramatic rise or decline for that matter.
Yeah, that's what I found, and I mean, it's funny, because I've been thinking about it a lot lately. Because by all means, as I was on Wall Street, I remember I thought I was onto something the day I was running this by the guy who was my boss at the time, and he just looked at me. He's like, "Well, stuff like that doesn't happen in the U.S." So I'm like, "All
Right.
right, well, okay." And then ironically, I mean, you hear that enough, and then the price stays low for so long. And, I find like people like David Icke, or people who like do believe in aliens, their economic assessment matches more what I lived through going through it. So I don't know what that says. But I mean, it's like when you just look at the stuff logically, it's there. And I didn't plan to do a book or a YouTube show, but it's like I just don't know. It's like where else outside of the metals or maybe some other commodities would you feel safe like telling someone to put money right now?
Well, personally for me, I can say nowhere else because of all the counterparty risk and uncertainty that's going on in the markets. But, I think you bring up an excellent point that silver and understanding silver is actually a gateway to understand a lot of other things
Like
that are going on in the
platinum
world.
and rhodium and uranium.
Yes, a lot of other things. And when you understand why there's certain narratives that take place in the silver market, you start to see other narratives, right? So, the purpose of your program and the purpose of my website, for example, is to get the word out, to really educate people, to understand, hey, there's a door here that you can walk through where you can understand a lot more about the world just by investigating this one market. And when you really understand it and you start to walk through that door, you come to a new consciousness, I would say, about reality, about who's really in charge of the world, right? And you know how power is used across the world through money. I think it's exciting, and one of the things I want to do is to just get people interested, right? And I think you're doing that as well, and you're doing a great job. And you know that's why you've got so many viewers. You know, it's a testament to not only your understanding of the silver market, but your ability to communicate to the average person like myself, right? You know, because I don't know anything about markets, and I get to watch you and learn a lot more about what's going on in the silver market. And it tells me a lot more about not just silver, but about the world. So thank you. You're doing a service to everyone.
Well, I sure appreciate that. And I mean, it's something I focused on where it's like, how can you take something that in some ways is complex, but explain it so my mom can understand it. And she's heard plenty about silver manipulation over the years at times when she probably didn't feel like it. And Scott, maybe the one last thing I might add is that I'm going to slightly disagree with you on one point, because I think there is one, this is just my opinion, not financial advice, but I think there's one place that is even better than silver or anything else like that, which is really investing in in yourself. Maybe you have a business idea, or and I think that's something that doesn't get mentioned enough, but is another great part of the type of people that get into silver, because some people have money to buy silver or not. But I think, again, that was something that was helpful to me, and it's great that you've started a business there and a great website, which I'm happy to tell people about because I enjoy it. Plus, I hear you may be joining us for the History of Silver panel this upcoming September 13th on Silverfest Sunday. Is that right, Scott?
I will be there with bells on to
Cool. Well,
interest you all in the silver market. Yes.
Well, I have Alex Newman, I think, will be joining you. And I'm going to call G. Edward Griffin, who might be he has to be one of the coolest people I've met in this lifetime. And we're going to see if he'd like to be on that panel. But it'll be a great time. Folks who are there at the conference will be able to ask some questions, and we can dig into silver. And in fact, before I let you run there, Scott, I got a good one for you. All the history you've studied, give us an interesting nugget about silver that people probably don't know about, but would be fascinated by.
Well, on my website, I actually wrote a brief little piece, historical piece on Alexander Del Mar. And Alexander Del Mar is probably a name that most people, even in the silver community, might not know. But he was probably the foremost precious metals expert in the United States in the 19th century. He literally wrote the book on the history of the precious metals. And if you've got a second here, I've got one of his books right here. It's called The Great Paper Bubble, or The Coming Financial Explosion. So he wrote this in the 19th century about the production of fiat paper money just after the Civil War. He knew that if they kept printing it, there was going to be disaster ahead. And he's got this neat little picture here in the book. I don't know if you can see it very well, where you've got this person blowing this bubble, and the primary beneficiaries in the bubble that's being blown are the owners of gold.
He kind of looks like Bernanke.
He kind of does look like Bernanke. Now that you mention it, maybe he's a distant relative.
Scott, I guess maybe my birthday is also coming up in September. So
happy birthday.
Perhaps, if you felt like giving me a present, maybe you would even be kind enough on the behalf of the world to explain gold to Ben Bernanke. And maybe we can dig into that one. We'll play that clip when we get to Silverfest of how I love how doesn't understand gold, doesn't know anybody else who does either. Although, fortunately, Scott, you've put together the Silver Independent. So, folks, we're going to wrap up for today, but go check out the Silver Independent. Scott, thank you for joining me. And
Thank
we'll
you,
look
Chris.
forward to doing this again in a couple of weeks at Silverfest.
Perfect. Glad to see you.
The